For over 40 years, Christopher Walken said almost nothing about the night Natalie Wood died. No interviews, no explanations, just silence. But now, at 81, the Oscar-winning actor has finally broken that silence. And what he revealed has left the world stunned. His words don't accuse, but they change everything. For decades, whispers surrounded that Thanksgiving weekend on the yacht. Now, Walken's haunting admission casts new light on Hollywood's most enduring mystery. What really happened to Natalie Wood? And why did Walken wait this long to speak? The truth may not bring closure, but it's finally breaking through the waves. A night in Hollywood history that never faded. It was Thanksgiving weekend, 1981. A luxury yacht, 3 Hollywood names, and a tragedy no one saw coming. Natalie Wood, one of the most beloved actresses of her time, joined her husband Robert Wagner and co-star Christopher Walken aboard the Splendor for a weekend trip to Catalina Island. What began as a quiet getaway turned into one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries. Late that night, something went terribly wrong. Natalie vanished from the boat. Hours later, her body was found floating face down in the dark waters near the shore. She was wearing only a nightgown, socks, and a jacket. The official story was that she fell while trying to secure the yacht's dinghy. But to this day, very few believe it was that simple. Walken, Wagner, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, were the only people on board. None of them could give a clear timeline. Rumors of alcohol, arguments, and jealousy swirled immediately. The press went wild. The public mourned. And while Wagner gave interviews, Walken said almost nothing. It was a tragedy, he told one reporter. But no one really knows what happened. And for over 40 years, he barely said another word. The silence became part of the mystery, and part of the legend. The waves swallowed Natalie's final moments, but the silence that followed would haunt Christopher Walken for decades. As the world demanded answers, he chose stillness. But silence, in Hollywood, is rarely innocent. Was it grief? Was it fear? Or was it something far more complicated? In the next chapter, we explore the secret Walken carried, and why he may have kept it for so long. The secret Christopher Walken carried for decades. From the moment Natalie's body was pulled from the water, Christopher Walken vanished into the shadows. He returned to work, gave short, flat responses when asked. But he never really talked about that night. Some saw his silence as respect. Others saw it as guilt. "I don't talk about it," he said in a rare interview. "It was an awful time." Walken was the last person to see Natalie alive, besides Wagner. They had spent the evening drinking, eating, and talking. But what exactly happened in those final hours? Rumors have circulated for years. Some say Wagner accused Walken of getting too close to Natalie. Others claim Walken tried to calm the tension and failed. He never confirmed any of it. His silence allowed theories to grow. Was he protecting Wagner? Protecting himself? Or simply overwhelmed by the trauma? For decades, Walken avoided the spotlight when it came to Natalie. But those close to him say it never left his mind. "He's lived with it," one colleague said. "You can see it in his eyes." Now, at 81, Walken is finally speaking more openly. While still careful, he has begun to hint at what he felt and saw. "Not everything made it into the report," he recently told a reporter. "Some things were left out." It was the first sign that his silence had been holding something deeper all along. For years, Walken said nothing. But others aboard the Splendor couldn't forget what they heard. As the world moved on, whispers from that night grew louder. The yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, had held his tongue too. But in time, he couldn't carry the weight anymore. What he revealed next would crack open the carefully preserved silence and point fingers in a new direction, until it was too late. That Thanksgiving night wasn't peaceful. According to later interviews, an argument erupted in the cabin of the Splendor. Wagner and Walken were reportedly clashing over Natalie's career and how close she and Walken had become. Some say Walken supported her desire to return to serious acting. Wagner didn't. It was about work, Davern later claimed, but it got personal fast. The fight escalated. Alcohol flowed freely. Crew members would later report hearing yelling, followed by the sound of objects breaking. Davern said it wasn't just a disagreement. It was a storm of jealousy, fear, and ego. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Natalie, caught between her co-star and her husband. Then came silence. Davern claims he didn't see Natalie go overboard, but he heard movement on deck. A splash. Then nothing. He says he told Wagner they needed to call for help immediately. Wagner allegedly refused, insisting they wait. "I wanted to call the Coast Guard," Davern said, "but I was told no." By the time the authorities were alerted, it was too late. Natalie's body had been in the water for hours. The initial investigation ruled it an accident. But Davern's version of events would change everything decades later. He claims Walken stood frozen during the fight, either too afraid to intervene or unwilling to get involved. Walken has never denied this. As the mystery deepened, one detail stood out. Natalie Wood had always feared the water. She had spoken of it often, to friends, family, even in interviews. Her fear wasn't casual. It was life-defining. So why would she venture out alone, in the dark, wearing only a nightgown? The answer lies in her past, and in a haunting childhood prophecy she never outran. Natalie's fear of water. Natalie Wood had one recurring fear her entire life: deep, dark water. Not just a passing discomfort, an all-consuming dread. As a child, her mother once took her to a fortune teller who warned that Natalie would die in dark water. The idea haunted her. She couldn't swim, refused to go into lakes or oceans, and avoided small boats unless absolutely necessary. Friends recalled how she would panic near the edge of a dock or tremble stepping onto a dinghy. Her sister, Natalie Wood, confirmed it again and again. She was terrified of water. She would never ever go near it alone. That's what made her death so confusing. Why would a woman with a lifelong fear suddenly venture into the ocean alone in the middle of the night? According to the original report, Natalie left the warmth of the yacht's cabin and tried to secure a loose dinghy, barefoot and in her nightgown. But to those who knew her, that explanation never added up. "She wouldn't even lean over the edge of a boat," said one close friend. "She would have woken someone, not gone alone." Even Walken has subtly pushed back on the official version. In a rare interview, he said, "It's hard to understand why she would have gone out there." Though he didn't elaborate, his tone was telling. Others believe she may have been trying to get away, perhaps from a fight. But jumping into dark water, willingly? Highly unlikely. That fear wasn't a secret. It was part of who Natalie was. Which is why her death felt more like a contradiction than an accident. "She didn't fall," Lana once said. "She was afraid of falling. That's the whole point." Natalie's fear painted a chilling backdrop. Her death wasn't just tragic. It was against everything she stood for. And yet, In the public eye, her story faded into a blur of speculation and silence. That silence was especially loud from Christopher Walken. Until recently, he kept his words measured, careful, almost rehearsed. But when he did speak, his message sent a chill. Walken's first public comments. In the years after Natalie's death, Christopher Walken remained mostly silent. When asked, he gave short, vague answers. In one early interview, he stated, "Nobody knows what happened. It was an accident." But people noticed how cautious he was. His words felt polished, almost like a script. He offered no emotion, no speculation, no insight, just distance. It wasn't just what he said, it was what he didn't. He never discussed the argument, never mentioned Wagner, never once said Natalie's name with real conviction. Fans began to wonder, was he hiding something or simply traumatized? Either way, the silence spoke volumes. As tabloids ran wild with rumors, Walken quietly slipped out of the narrative. Over time, the pressure grew. Books were written, documentaries aired, theories evolved. But Walken held his ground. When asked again, he said, "The only thing I can say is that it was a tragedy. It stayed with me." That sentence, those 5 words, became his standard. But pain was visible in his eyes. Friends said the event changed him. It wasn't until much later, in his 70s, that Walken started dropping hints. Things were left out of the reports, he admitted to a journalist. He didn't say what or by whom, but for the first time, the door cracked open, and in that small gesture, something shifted. His silence wasn't just protective, it was burdened, and possibly regretful. While Walken remained guarded, another man on board the Splendor was ready to talk. Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain, had followed the same story for years. But decades later, guilt caught up to him. What he finally confessed turned the spotlight back on Wagner, and left Walken standing in the shadows once again. This time not just as a witness, but as a man who had looked away. Dennis Davern breaks the silence. For years, Dennis Davern, captain of the Splendor, supported the official version. Natalie Wood drowned accidentally. But in 2009, nearly 3 decades after that fateful night, he broke. In a bombshell interview, he changed everything. "I lied," he said bluntly. "There was more going on. A lot more." Davern claimed the night was filled with tension. He said Robert Wagner was furious over Natalie and Walken's closeness, and that they had a screaming match on the deck. He remembered hearing something heavy hit the side of the boat, followed by silence. He insisted Wagner delayed calling for help. "He didn't want the story getting out," Davern said. "He wanted time to clean things up." And where was Walken in all this? According to Davern, Walken stood off to the side, numb, expressionless, unwilling to intervene. He was paralyzed, Davern said, like he didn't want to be there, but didn't know how to stop it. The image stuck, a man caught between truth and survival. In the years since, Walken has never publicly challenged Davern's account. He hasn't confirmed it either. But the silence is loud. "You can hear a lot in silence," Davern once remarked. And in this case, what wasn't said may matter more than what was. Wagner named a person of interest, but never charged. In 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially reopened the case of Natalie Wood's death. Too many questions, too much silence, too many contradictions. By 2018, the case shifted dramatically. Robert Wagner, Natalie's husband and the only person confirmed to be with her in her final moments, was named a person of interest. Investigators stopped calling it an accident. They now used words like suspicious and inconsistent. One officer stated, "We have reason to believe something more happened that night." The autopsy was amended. New bruises were found on Natalie's arms and legs, suggesting a possible struggle before she entered the water. Wagner refused to speak publicly. His interviews dried up. His lawyers answered questions instead. But what raised eyebrows was the mention that Christopher Walken had cooperated fully in private interviews. The man who had avoided talking for decades had quietly spoken to detectives behind closed doors. What did he say? That remains confidential. But law enforcement confirmed he verified the fight, confirmed alcohol played a role, and confirmed timelines had been misleading. He offered no accusations, but his confirmation gave new weight to what Dennis DeVerne had claimed all along. Still, no charges were filed. Without new eyewitnesses or physical evidence, the case remained stuck. Walken's cooperation helped, but it wasn't enough to push it across the line. Justice, it seemed, was still just out of reach. As police chased loose threads, one truth became clear. Walken had seen more than he ever let on, and for decades that truth had lived inside him. But silence has a cost. Behind the camera, Walken's friends noticed something shift, something deeper than grief. Because when fame meets fear, even a man who plays fearless villains can live in quiet torment. A death re-examined. As years passed, Natalie's death remained a haunting cold case, refusing to settle. In the 2010s, with new forensic tools and a wave of interest in revisiting old Hollywood scandals, the pressure built again. Her case resurfaced on crime shows, podcasts, and tabloids. Each time, one name kept appearing next to Wagner's: Walken. The bruises found on Natalie's body weren't light or easily explained. Some were on the back of her legs, others on her arms, patterns that didn't match a simple fall. And then there were the screams. Multiple witnesses on nearby boats reported hearing a woman crying for help around midnight. The voices went unanswered. The revised autopsy listed drowning and other undetermined factors. It didn't say murder, but it didn't say accident anymore either. The reclassification cracked the long-accepted narrative. People began to ask again, who knew what? And when? Walken still avoided direct interviews, but a shift in tone appeared. In one quiet conversation with a reporter, he said, "What happened that night is not my story to tell. But I think people deserve honesty." That line was the closest he'd ever come to suggesting guilt. Not his own, but someone else's. The public read between the lines. The police weren't closing the case, and Wagner, now well into his 90s, remained silent. The tragedy that once seemed distant was suddenly alive again, breathing down everyone's necks, especially Walken's. For outsiders, this was just another Hollywood mystery. But for Christopher Walken, it was a wound that never closed. His career continued, but behind the scenes, he became more reclusive, more withdrawn. The question wasn't just what he saw, it was why he stayed silent. And the answer, some say, has less to do with guilt and more with fear. Why Walken stayed silent. Christopher Walken's silence wasn't just personal, it was survival. In the 1980s, Hollywood was still a fortress. A-list stars protected each other, studios suppressed scandals, and speaking out could kill a career. Insiders now say Walken was warned. Say nothing, do nothing. And he listened. Many believe Walken feared Robert Wagner, not physically, but professionally. Wagner was a powerful man with deep Hollywood roots. Speaking against him, even indirectly, could have made Walken a pariah, So he chose the only safe path: stay quiet, keep working, and pretend nothing happened. But it wasn't that easy. Friends say Walken was never the same after that weekend. He grew more guarded, more intense in his performances. Directors noticed his roles became darker, more internal, more haunted. One called it the shadow under every character he played. The tragedy followed him, quietly, but constantly. Some believe he was traumatized, not complicit. That he froze, not out of guilt, but from sheer helplessness. "He's not a villain," one former co-star said. "He's a man who couldn't save her. And that truth eats at you." Now Walken admits something rare: regret. "Silence doesn't protect you forever," he recently told a reporter. "Eventually, the truth finds you." It wasn't a confession, but it was something even heavier. A window into a soul that had carried too much for too long. Hollywood's deadliest triangle. On the surface, it looked like an innocent friendship. Natalie Wood and Christopher Walken, co-stars in the sci-fi film Brainstorm. But insiders claimed there was something more, something that stirred unease in Robert Wagner. The chemistry between Walken and Natalie wasn't just on screen. They were close, one crew member said, too close for Wagner's comfort. Rumors swirled. Were Natalie and Walken having an affair? Was it just emotional? Or was it professional jealousy? Wagner had long controlled much of Natalie's career, and Walken, young, enigmatic, respected, was urging her to return to more serious roles. He encouraged her independence. That alone was enough to light a fuse. According to Dennis Davern, the captain, Wagner exploded during a dinner on the Splendor. He accused Walken of trying to steal his wife, Davern claimed. The mood shifted. Walken tried to defuse things, but Wagner kept pushing. Natalie reportedly left the table in tears. "It wasn't just a fight," Davern said. "It was a confrontation, years in the making." Walken has always denied any romantic involvement. "She was a colleague, a great actress. That's all," he once told a reporter. But his tone suggested weariness, like a man tired of hiding from the shadows of something he never asked for. Whether or not he and Natalie were more than friends, what happened that night was fueled by jealousy, and maybe rage. The triangle of Wagner, Walken, and Natalie was never confirmed, but its tension changed everything. What was meant to be a peaceful holiday weekend became a storm of suspicion. But beyond rumors and roles, Natalie left behind a real legacy: children, films, and a life stolen too soon. And Walken, more than anyone, was left to carry a silence shaped by guilt and grief. The legacy Natalie left behind. Natalie Wood wasn't just a tabloid headline. She was a mother of two, a Hollywood trailblazer, and a symbol of grace under pressure. Her daughters, especially Natasha Gregson Wagner, have worked for years to shift focus from the mystery of her death to the magic of her life. "She was more than how she died," Natasha once said. "She was how she lived." Walken has echoed that sentiment in rare moments. "She was luminous," he told an interviewer. "People forget the talent because they chase the tragedy." But despite his admiration, there's a quiet weight behind his words, a sense that, for all his respect, he didn't do enough, that in the crucial hour he could have said or done something, and didn't. He's never spoken to Natalie's daughters publicly. He's never commented on their efforts to preserve her legacy. But those close to him say he watches from afar, supportive, but distant. "He carries her with him," one friend claimed. "It's not loud, it's not obvious, but it's there." In a recent interview, Walken finally broke slightly from his reserved stance. "There are things I wish I'd said," he admitted. "Things I should have said." It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it was a crack in the armor. A hint that behind all the silence was a man who had mourned privately, every day, for decades. While Walken's sorrow remained locked behind interviews and glances, Hollywood itself played a darker role. Because in the 1980s, image ruled everything, and secrets were currency. Natalie's death wasn't just tragic, it was inconvenient. And for men like Walken and Wagner, silence was more than a choice. It was expected. In the next chapter, we uncover the true power of that code of silence. Hollywood's code of silence. In 1981, Hollywood was a fortress built on charm, secrets, and spin. Publicists controlled narratives, studios crushed scandals, and male stars were shielded, especially when reputations were on the line. Natalie Wood's death was a PR nightmare. But instead of full transparency, the machine went into lockdown. Walken, still rising in his career, was swept into that machinery. Insiders say he was advised sternly not to talk. Studios didn't want drama, one producer recalled. They wanted him to move on, stay quiet, and not rock the boat. And so he did. His silence wasn't just personal. It was strategic. It was survival. Robert Wagner, already an established TV star, had even more protection. Friends in high places. A reputation to preserve. When Davern tried to speak out early on, he said he felt pressured to retract. "They made me feel like I'd ruin lives," he claimed. And Walken? He stayed silent as everyone around him closed ranks. Hollywood's media machine helped shape the narrative. Accidental drowning. A tragic twist. Nothing more to see. But as decades passed and voices began to crack through the silence, the image of invincibility faded. "It was a different time," Walken finally said. "Different rules. Different pressures." The truth? Hollywood didn't just fail Natalie Wood. It suffocated the story. It forced people, like Walken, to carry silence like a cross. Not just for weeks, but for the silence protected careers. But it came at a cost. For Walken, it meant burying pain, dodging questions, and letting the world decide its own narrative. Yet even in stillness, something shifted. Those who knew him saw a man slowly transformed. And as the years passed, Walken's characters began to reflect the very thing he could never escape. A tragedy buried just beneath the surface. Walken's career. After the tragedy. Christopher Walken has always been known for his intensity, those piercing eyes, the unpredictable delivery, the strange rhythm in every role. But after 1981, something in his performances darkened. Directors noted it. So did fans. He wasn't just acting, one co-star said. He looked haunted. Though he never stopped working, Walken became increasingly private. He avoided talk shows, dodged interviews, rarely discussed his personal life. When he did speak, his answers were elliptical, like someone playing a role he didn't quite believe in anymore. "He became a ghost of himself," said one longtime friend, "not in life, but in spirit." His roles followed suit. From villains to loners, from silent killers to broken men, his characters began to mirror a weight that seemed all too real. Whether in The Deer Hunter, Catch Me If You Can, or Seven Psychopaths, Walken brought a quiet sadness to his roles. Something deep, unspoken. Was it grief, guilt, or just age? Some say he poured what he couldn't say about Natalie into the parts he played. A way to process. A way to speak without speaking. Acting is memory, Walken once said. You pull from what you know, even when you don't want to. And what he knew was a secret the world never stopped asking about. Christopher Walken's voice, once silent, now echoes louder than ever. His long-awaited admission doesn't solve the mystery, but it shifts the weight of it. Natalie Wood's death will always raise questions, but for the first time, we have part of the answer from someone who was there. Walken's quiet agony, his guarded regret, and his final words show that silence doesn't erase the past. It only delays its reckoning. As Hollywood reflects on its darkest secrets, one thing is clear. Walken may never find peace, but he has finally spoken. And the world will never look at that night, or him, the same way again.